There is a story in the Talmud. It's maybe my favorite story in all of the Talmud. My grandfather used to tell it to me when I was a kid. And it's a story about Rabbi Akiva, who we are told had an amazing mantra. Rabbi Akiva, the Talmud tells us, mantra was that everything that God does for the best. Everything that God does for the best. And in this story, in the Talmud, Rabbi Akiva is out on a long journey, and he's tired, and he comes to a town where he wants to spend the night, and he goes into the town and goes to an inn in the town, and he is told by the innkeeper that there is no room in the inn. And Rabbi Akiva says, okay, everything that God does for the best, and he leaves the town, and he goes out to a hillside nearby to spend the night. And Rabbi Akiva has with him at this hillside a lamp, a rooster, and a donkey. The lamp, this makes sense, the lamp, in a different time before electricity, the lamp was used for him to give light so he could read. The rooster was his alarm clock. The donkey was like his car for him to carry all of his stuff. So Rabbi Akiva goes with his donkey and his lamp and his rooster to the hillside, and he begins reading and studying Torah by the lamplight. After a little while, a great wind comes and blows out the lamp, and Rabbi Akiva says, everything that God does for the best, and he goes to sleep. After a few hours, he's woken up by a kerfuffle, and a pack of animals have taken away his rooster. Again, he says everything that God does for the best, and he goes back to sleep. After a little while, he wakes up again. The animals have returned. This time, they have taken his donkey. And again, Rabbi Akiva says everything that God does for the best. And in the morning, he wakes up and he goes back to the town, and he discovers that during the night, bandits came and the town was sacked. And had Rabbi Akiva spent the night in the inn, he would have been one of the people taken in this attack. And had his lamp been on, the bandits would have seen him, and had he had the donkey or the rooster, they would have heard him. And there's a lot in this story that's problematic from a theological lens. Underneath what Rabbi Akiva is saying about God having this plan, and I'm troubled in this story by the fact that although everything works out well for Rabbi Akiva, what about all of the other inhabitants of the town? Can these still say everything that God does for the best? But I want to use this story tonight as a paradigm to talk about faith. Rabbi Akiva in this story demonstrates what it is to have faith. He believes in those moments of difficulty. He believes when he's confronted with those obstacles in God, in something larger than him, in some other force guiding his life in the universe. This question of faith in times of stress and difficult times comes up again in this week's Parsha. In this week's Parsha, the Israelites are in the desert. They are approaching the promised land. And so Moses sends a group of Israelites to go visit and survey the land. We are told, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor shlach lecha anashim v'yaturu et eretz Canaan. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, send men to scout the land of Canaan. V'yaturu, send men to scout the land of Canaan. So Moses sends these scouts or these spies who go to Latur et Haaretz, who go to examine, explore the land, thinking that maybe they'll bring back good news. That after all this time wandering in the desert, that maybe the spies will come back and say, we've arrived. We're finally there. But what happens? The spies come back after 40 days, and they come to Aaron and to Moses, and they say before Aaron and Moses and the whole community, they say, "We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. However, the people who inhabit the country are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakites there, giants. Amalekites dwell in the Negev region. Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites inhabit the hill country, and Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan." This country that they've been going to for so long, this idea, this dream is now shattered. And what happens next? This report of the spies spreads throughout the camp. Pandemonium ensues. People wail, people cry, and God gets angry. For not the first time in the Torah. But God gets angry, and maybe in a moment that is not God's proudest, God's best moment, we are told by the Midrash that God says, "Oh yeah? You think this is bad? You think you should be crying about this? I'll give you something to cry about," God says. And the Midrash tells us that at this moment, God decrees that not only will this entire generation have to perish before entering the land, not only will the Israelites have to wander for 40 years before entering the desert, but we are told that on this very day, God decrees that the first and the second temple will be destroyed. God decrees that on this day, Jerusalem will be sacked. This day is the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, and this day, when the spies came back and gave this report, is to become a day of tragedy and sorrow and calamity throughout all time. But the question that I have about this, and this is the question that many of the Meforshim, many of the commentators have as well, is why? Why? What did the spies do wrong? Surely the spies were just doing their job. They were sent to scout the land. They were sent to investigate and to bring back a report. They brought back a report. So what, Moses, if you don't like it? They were doing what you asked them to do. They were told to survey the land, and that's what they do. Isaac Arama, a 15th century Spanish commentator who wrote a book called Akedat Yisrael, compares this story of the spies to someone who asks a friend to go look for a tallis for him. The friend says, "Please go to this store on such and such street and look at the talitot that they have and tell me how they look." Right? The spies are like that. The spies are just agents. So what did the spies do wrong? What's the problem? The commentators are divided on this issue. They present us with three possible explanations. The first explanation that they give is that there was something in the way the spies delivered the message which was problematic, something about their tone, about the language that they used. Right? Maybe they spoke in a way which was disrespectful. Maybe they highlighted certain parts that they didn't need to highlight. The second explanation given by the sages is that the spies exaggerated something. Yes, there were giants in the land, and yes, there were gigantic fruit, and yes, there were enemies all around. But in their telling of it, the commentators say, the spies embellished. They did what we all do when we tell stories. They added to it. And this is the problem. The third explanation that the sages give, however, is one that I want to land on and sort of sit with. The sages tell us that ultimately, the true failure of the spies, and by extension, all of the people of Israel in this moment, was that their actions demonstrated a lack of faith. Their actions demonstrated a lack of faith. They forgot about God. By going out and investigating the land, they viewed the giant grapes and the giants and all the obstacles, and all that they could see was what before them. And they forgot that underneath all of that is something eternal, something that we can't always see or touch. And they forgot that this very God had only recently freed them from slavery, had been guiding them through the desert, had split the seas for them. And even with all of that evidence, even with them having encounters with God that I and many of us most likely will never have in our lives, they still in this moment forgot. And the sages say this is ultimately the true failure of the spies, is that in this moment, when confronted with these challenges, these obstacles, they forgot about God. And unlike Rabbi Akiva, when they saw danger and trouble, hardships, the response was not to recall God, as Rabbi Akiva would do. The response in that moment was to focus only on what was in front of them, only what they could see with their eyes, not what was underneath it. It's easy to lose faith. It's easy to lose faith. I think it's the hardest thing in the world to look at this world with all of its flaws, with all of its shortcomings, to notice all of the ways that people suffer unjustly, unfairly, and to still believe in God, and still believe in something larger than ourselves. It's much harder to believe in that God, given the realities that we all face on an ongoing basis. But it is ultimately the capacity to believe in something, whether it's God or the human capacity to do good or community. It's ultimately that ability to believe that makes life worth living, that makes life meaningful. Kierkegaard, the great theologian and philosopher, wrote, "If there were no eternal consciousness in a person, if at the bottom of everything was only a wild ferment, if an unfathomable emptiness hid beneath everything, what would life be but despair?" We have a choice. We can choose that despair, and maybe that's the easier choice. Or we can choose to be like Rabbi Akiva in those moments and to recall God. At the very end of this week's Parsha, this idea is reinforced. So after this amazing, beautiful story about the spies, we are given a series of very disparate, sort of random laws. And at the very, very end, the final paragraph of our Parsha, we get the commandment for tzitzit, the commandment for fringes, a commandment that is so important that our sages say that this commandment of the tzitzit is equal in weight to all of the commandments of the mitzvot, a commandment which is so important that we read about it in the Shema twice a day. We're told in this paragraph, the Lord said to Moses as follows, "Speak to the Israelites and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe of each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall the commandments of the Lord. Observe them so that you do not follow your heart and your eyes and your lustful urges." V'lo taturu achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem. Do not be led astray after your hearts or after your eyes. V'lo taturu, the same word as we have from the beginning. V'yaturu, latur, to spy, to scout out. Our Parsha is bookended by this word latur. It's bookended to remind us to not be like the spies, to remind us to not make the same mistake as the spies, to remind us to not get distracted by everything that is out there, and forget everything that is in here. Don't be led astray by your eyes. Trust in something deeper. As they say, all that glitters is not gold. Shabbat Shalom.